Govan Whittles is in Nasrec monitoring developments there as delegates arrive. Those are members of the ANC's NEC. They will be meeting in a couple of moments. Already, 5 of the top 6 have arrived, as we heard from Govan Whittles, with the exception of President Cyril Ramaphosa. In other words, constitutional crisis have been bandied about and used quite loosely over the past couple of days since the release of that report. So let's take a look at what the Constitution says and how this process will play itself out. We're now joined by Lawson Naidoo. Lawson, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. Perhaps we'll start with the introduction on page 1 of that report, and the excerpt reads, "The President, as the head of state and head of the executive branch of government, holds the ultimate public trust. He is required to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution and the supreme law of the Republic. He swears an oath to be faithful to the Republic and to obey, observe, uphold and maintain the Constitution and all other laws of the Republic, mindful of the fallibility of human nature and that too much power corrupts. The Constitution has, among other safeguards, a built-in safety valve, the impeachment and removal from office process."
That is an important aspect of our Constitution, that the President and all members, publicly elected representatives, are required to swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution and the laws of the Republic, and to act in the public interest. And this is an important feature. This impeachment process is an important feature of holding the President to account by the National Assembly, and this was emphasized by the Constitutional Court when it ordered Parliament to put in place the necessary rules of Parliament to guide the impeachment process. So I think South Africa can be proud that our system of governance, our systems of accountability, whilst not always adhered to, are in this case working.
As we mentioned, the words constitutional crises have been, have been bandied about over the past couple of hours, if you will. Does it appear to you at least, that South Africa has a constitutional crisis?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think this proves that the Constitution works, that the mechanisms for accountability that are in place do in fact work. Whether one accepts the findings of the recommendations of the report of the independent panel, I think it proves that our system of governance works. I think this is it's a political crisis, perhaps, but it's certainly not a constitutional crisis. The Constitution is very clear in terms of how the National Assembly should hold the President to account in circumstances such as these, and what steps need to be followed in ensuring that accountability is effectively exercised.
Lawson, as NEC members make their way through to the venue and they have their various security checks, let's go back to this moment from yesterday when we heard from the presidency's spokesperson, Mr. Vincent Mangwenya, capturing what South Africa is going through right now. Let's take a look, listen at this.
In an unprecedented and extraordinary moment as a constitutional democracy, as a result of the report, and therefore whatever decision the President makes, that decision has to be informed by the best interest of the country, and that decision cannot be rushed and cannot be taken in haste.
Lawson Naidoo, what options are available for the President legally?
Well, the President, could challenge the report, and I think, having studied the report in some detail, I think there are grounds on which a challenge may be appropriate. But I think it's also important to recognize that this is a preliminary investigation by this independent panel, and the recommendations it makes are not binding on the National Assembly. What happens next is that the Speaker must schedule a debate in the National Assembly on the contents of the report, and the Assembly, the 400 members of the National Assembly will decide whether or not to accept or reject these findings. And if they accept those findings, then we then move on to the next phase of the process, which is the establishment of an ad hoc committee of the National Assembly to investigate these matters further, to call witnesses, to summon people to give evidence. Because, what we do know is that the independent panel operated on the basis of documents that were submitted to them. They did not interview any of the witnesses and simply made their recommendations on the basis of the papers before them. So there's a long way to go before determining whether or not the president is actually guilty of serious misconduct or, acting in violation of the law or the Constitution. That determination is yet to be made, and that is a determination that can only be made by the National Assembly.
Fair enough. You've identified Lawson grounds for a challenge after reading the report. What are those grounds?
Well, I think the primary one is the panel has conflated the standard of proof that is required to conduct their preliminary investigation. The rules state that there must be sufficient evidence of wrongdoing before the panel may recommend that the matter be taken further. Yet they seem to have been using a lower standard of proof, and they've used the terms sufficient evidence and prima facie interchangeably in the report. And to my mind, those mean very different things. And I think the issue of sufficient evidence is a higher standard of proof that is required. And I think the National Assembly deliberately used the different terms in relation to prima facie in the case of the removal of the head of a Chapter 9 institution, and sufficient evidence in the case of the head of state. And I think that's there deliberately and for a very good reason, is that it should never be easy to remove a head of state from office. There must, if grounds do exist, and of course the appropriate action must be taken, but it does set a higher bar. And I think, that's one of the fundamental issues that might be ripe for challenge in any legal process that might follow.
Lawson, Naidoo, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon.